percents, decimals, and fractions. Changing percents to decimals here, it just may help to understand what the percent is. Now, I could be wrong, but I think I saw that at least in New Zealand, it's written like this. Percent is not one word. It's two words. Percent. Well, per would be kind of like saying it's out of, and cent is hundreds. So it's out of 100, right? So if we wrote this number 1 out, it would be 20 out of 100. Well, could we write that as a fraction? Sure, we could. We could make this 20 over 100 like this. And then we could use that to divide, to change that into a decimal, which would be 0.2. This is the decimal, which is what we wanted, but there's another way we can look at this. And since it's always out of 100, really all we're going to be doing is taking the decimal. Now there's kind of an invisible decimal right there with that 20%. If we move this over twice to account for each of these zeros right here, which do come from the 100, if I'm not mistaken, based on math history, not that anyone cares, but that would give me my answer, 0, and then the decimal 0.20. Now I'm okay, it's kind of formal to write that 0 in. I'm okay not having it, because it's still the same value. Very good. Either way, yeah. Now we did talk about writing decimals on the test, right? Like if you're not gonna put the 0 there, just make sure the decimal's prominent. Prominent, yeah. Because you're right. I think I explained this. I've just had students in the past, and I don't know what to say, but this is the decimal. Now we can see that on the big board right here, but if I'm looking at barely, or even on the board. But on a test, I mean, it's hard for me to tell if that's a printing spot or what the heck it is. What about number 3? This one. Very good, yeah. If we move this decimal over twice, we need a 0 there as a placeholder, place value holder. So, yeah, 0.074 there. And what about number 4? Same idea. We'll move it over twice. We need a 0 for the place holding. 0.003. Yeah, that's a decimal right there. Number 5. So the decimal again, we'll just move it twice, okay? So we're just going to move this over, making that 1.27 as a decimal. Now we could have seen this as well, 127 over 100, and well, you could have put that in the calculator and solve for it as well. So, either way. So when we write these decimals as a percent, really what we want to focus on is the place value of the hundredths position. So the 7 here is in the tenths position. The 4 is in the hundredths position. So we're just going to write this as though the 4 were the ones place, making this a 74, because we have 74 hundredths, and we could write this as a fraction like this. But since it's 74 hundredths, it would be 74%. 74 out of 100, and hopefully we can go back and forth between these, right? If we were to move this decimal over, then we'd get the same answer that we started with, so we know that we've done that correctly. Now this one doesn't have a value in the hundredths position, so we gotta fill that in. We can just fill it in with the 0. So this is, 90 hundredths, which means it's really just 90%. 8 here is a little bit tricky because we have a 2 here in the hundredths position. So this would be 2.54 as a percent. Okay, because 2 is in the hundredths, so that's going to be the whole value for the percentages. Another way that you guys may want to think about this is to change a decimal to a percent. We're just going to move the decimal over 2 times to the right. Now we have to compare this with these ones that we just barely did, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. For these ones, we were moving the decimal over to the left to change the percent to a decimal. So we have to just remember which is which. And it doesn't matter if the percent has a decimal, it's always going to move 2 times to the left. Well, the decimals already have decimals, so we have to know that it's not a percent to move it 2 times to the right. Or again, it's just like we're taking this value here and dividing it by 100. What would this be as a percent? 135%. Very good. And number 10? 5%. Let's check. So it may help to do long division on these. 3 divided by 4. 4 won't go into 3. Of course, some of you guys know that this is 75. So minus the 28. 2 remaining. Drop the 0. And we got 5. So 0.75 is the decimal. But what we really want is the percent. So we'll just move this decimal 2 times to the right. And we got 75% for number 1. 12. If we need to do the math, we can, but most people know this is 0.5, which would be what as a percent? There you go. 1/2 is always a nice fraction to work with. 13, though, this one we will have to round to the nearest hundredth of a percent because this one will repeat. So we got 1 divided by 6. 6 doesn't go into 1, but it will go into 10 once. Minus a 6, we got a 4, drop the 0. And it will go into 46 times. So 36. And this has a 4 that's repeating now right here. So it's just going to be a bunch of 6s. So if this was a decimal, I would move it 2 times to the right to make that 0.1. I'm sorry, what the heck? 16.6 repeating. And since it did tell us to round to the nearest hundredth, this 6 is going to round this one up to a 7. Yep. So 16.67. And this is just a percent. So tag on that label and we're good. 16, we'll write this as a reduced fraction. This one seems like we did 0.25 already. But if we want to change just a decimal to a fraction, now notice 20 and 21 there at the bottom, those are percentages. So they are going to work a little bit different. But the 5 here is in the hundredths position, so we just treat this like a full whole number, 25, and then we'll divide it by the place value of the number farthest to the right. So it's 25, the 5 is in the hundredths position. We'll simplify this by dividing both these by 25, and we get 1/4. Same with this 0.3 stuff. This 3 is in the 10th position, so I would just write this as a 3 in the 10th position. So when we start these out, that denominator will always be some kind of multiple of 10. Okay? But this one, as it turns out, can't be simplified any further anyways. So we're done. Alright, knowing that, let's look at 20 though. So for these percentages, we need to change these into decimals first. So that's 40%. I need to move this decimal 2 times to the left, leaving me with 0.4. 0.4 has a 4 in the tenths position, and this one can be simplified by dividing both of these by 2, which gives me 2/5. 128 is the same idea. Percent. We need to change this to a decimal. So that would leave us with 1.28. So the 8 here is in the hundredths position, so that's really, we're going to make that 128 hundredths. Now, yeah, so you guys are noticing, hopefully you notice this on 20 as well. We can change a percent directly into a fraction by just putting it over 100, because it's out of every 100%, okay? All we need to do for that is simplify, and it looks like these two are divisible by, I see 4 at least. Let's try 4 and see how far that takes us. If I divide these by 4, I got 32 out of 25. Yeah, that looks like that's as far as we can take that one. All right, so this one we'll do as though we're just going to change it to a fraction right away, right? So this is 2.5 per 100, so I really have 2.5 per 100, like this. Well, since we do want a fraction on this, I can just move this decimal over once, which means I need to move this one over once, making that 1,000. 25 over 1,000. Which just may be a little bit easier to work with on this. We can divide this both by 25, which gives me 1/40. And yeah, we could have did this long division starting out with the 2.5. 2.5 divided by 100. 100 doesn't go into 2, it doesn't go into 25, but it will go into 250 twice.
What about 23?
But again, that's just going to give you the decimals. So since we do want fractions on these, I'm going to just make this, because it's 0.6, 0.6 per cent, so per 100 out of 100 like this. And if we move this decimal over, we'll move this decimal over as well, making this 6 out of 1,000. Both these are even, so we should be able to divide them both by 2, leaving me with 3 500ths.